How's it going, everybody? And welcome to the Music Production Podcast, the show where we talk about all things making music, whether that's gear, production, creative process, or just the emotional difficulties that we all suffer through. Today, I'm very excited to speak with our guest, Tommy Zee. And Tommy Zee has a music production company that makes music for some pretty big bands like Nike, Google, brands, not bands, Nike, Google, Adidas, Sony, Toyota, and many more. Lots of really cool work. He's making music full time, and he's going to talk about his journey and all that stuff. I think there's some good wisdom based on some of the pre-interview banter we just had. So, Tommy, welcome to the show. Thanks for being on.
Thanks, Brian. I'm excited, man. I've been following you for a while, actually, and
oh, really?
I can almost guarantee you that some of your packs have made themselves known in some commercials. I couldn't tell you where and when because most of my work is chaos because it's so quick and painful, the deadlines, that you try to forget about it as soon as you're done with the job and move on to the next one. But I've definitely been inspired by some of the delightful sounds that you managed to make in your studio and shared with others.
Oh, that's super cool. That's
man.
A lot of fun. I always wonder where everything goes after I put it out there. You know, what happens, what songs are they on? And maybe it's cool to know that they've done some good for you with the commercial work. Thanks.
You got to put it out there, right? I mean, it can only make a difference when it goes live. Otherwise, it cannot push any dominoes.
Yeah, that's true. And I think we mentioned it just a second ago, talking about perfection and everything and how that is such a hindrance to getting things done. And for me,
Yes.
it's definitely something I struggle with, but there is a point where you have to say, like, you know, this is good enough, or let's see what other people say. And sometimes you're surprised, you know?
I don't know about you, but I get more creative. The more I do, the more creative I get. In other words, if I'm working, let's say, on a commercial, and I'm sure we'll start from the beginning and all that, but when I'm working on something, I find that the more attempts that I make, the looser I get. I guess it's almost like, you know, warming up before you exercise or something, that you just sort of, the more you do it, the more you loosen up and the more stuff flows out of you, I find.
I totally agree. I did a podcast recently called Be Prolific with the
I mentioned that actually in my email to you.
Yeah, the pro, capital Pro, meaning like, I think you're so right, because when you're constantly doing stuff and putting it out and working, things become less precious.
That's it.
I mean, like, even just from like making my sounds and stuff, if I'm just making one sound, I go like a little too nuts with it. And
how long did Axl Rose spend on his album?
Oh, Chinese Democracy?
Yeah.
Like 2 decades.
This is a case in point. This is what happens when you get too close to your work and you get too precious with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that album was hyped since probably the early 90s, I think. and you know what? I never even listened to it.
I didn't either. Maybe it's brilliant. Maybe it's brilliant. I don't know.
I would have listened to it when it came out, like right after Use Your Illusions 1 and 2. That's funny.
It's just the perfect example of what not to do. Life is short.
Yeah. And
I think the more at-bats that you have, the more likely is that you'll hit it out of the park.
Absolutely.
You know, 300 is a great batting average.
Yeah.
That's 3 out of 10. You know, that's considered a failure by any standard. But actually, I think 300 in music is quite good. And I think it's actually probably the right, average, I would say. Like 2, 3 out of 10 are pretty good. In my case, anyway. That's why you got to do a lot, you know, you just got to do a lot. And I still don't know, and I don't think anybody knows. Like, there are neuroscientists that tell us why certain songs are hits, and I always laugh at it, right? And I always say, well, how come neuroscientists are not all over the charts?
Yeah.
because there is a deep, infinite valley between theoretical knowledge of music and the actual ability to create something magical for which there is no blueprint. The only blueprint that I know is to actually just keep going to bat and just keep doing it as much as possible. And I can almost guarantee that if somebody loves this thing and they have a passion for it and they keep doing this, something good has to come out of your studio at some point. I mean, the universe is fair that way, you know.
Yeah.
I think it's more rare than not that good things come out of people's studio when they belong in the studio. I mean, let's not kid ourselves, you know. I guess there are some people that do not belong in the studio, but I don't think there's that many of these folks who would keep investing in their passion and not actually be able to create anything good in the lifetime of their work, right?
Yeah, I think that if you're honestly working and pushing and really doing it, you know, there's a lot of ways to fool ourselves and to think we're being productive and think we're working, whether it's watching YouTube videos or downloading plugins. You know, that feels like we're doing our music stuff, but the real progress happens when you're actually doing it, when you're actually writing, recording, turning the knobs, when you're listening back. It's not going to happen reading about it or watching videos. No way.
I'll tell you something. I come from a completely different world. I come from a world where I don't have the luxury of time to put out something of my own, and so in a way I have it much easier because I am a commissioned craftsperson, which means I am paid to deliver something in a short amount of time, and it's like the brand basically buys the canvas and it's already hanging in the museum and people will come and see it on opening night. And so I have no choice but to deliver it. So I have immense amounts of respect for musicians that I work with, some of them who are actually active artists who put out music that nobody is waiting for. Because I found that is the most difficult thing, you know. I've put out a few things on my own, and it was an immense struggle, man. Like, no one waiting for your music, you know, and I found it very difficult to focus and to actually create that sort of pressure that is necessary for me to stick to a deadline. So I actually don't have that problem in my field of work because I have no option but to deliver a piece of remarkable music, sometimes in less than 24 hours. And it's not always pretty, you know, but it makes it easier actually not to overthink, not to get paralyzed, and not to wonder what you're going to do, but just sit down and try to solve the problem as best as possible.
It's so true. The deadline and the person, you know, standing behind you with their arms folded, waiting for action is so important. I think there's a principle, I'm drawing a blank on the name of it, but where the project will just swell, and you'll take as much time as you need to fill the deadline. You know, if you have 3 months to do something, you'll find a way to fill 3 months doing it. If you have 3 hours, you will, okay, we got to get it done. We've all done, you know, papers at school the night before it was due and turned it out. But when we have like a whole month to do it, we usually just wait, or we let it build up as anxiety and pressure.
And you know what? I think a certain amount of procrastination is actually a creative tool in itself, because I think that subconsciously your brain is trying to figure out the problem. I find that I tend to procrastinate consciously in a sense that I know that I can only start coming up with great ideas when I've been able to eat the problem and like digest it well for a while. And then I'm going to burp up some ideas that will actually have considered all the different factors and criteria and the universe that is the problem. You need, just like music and sound needs time to actually exist. I think it's the same for solving problems. We got to spend some time actually sitting with the problem. I think Einstein had this quote where he said, if I'm given a problem, I spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and only 5 minutes trying to solve it. So he said, actually 55 minutes to define the problem and 5 minutes to solve it. So I find that actually in making music also, we have these moments where you just get stuck, like you have no idea where to go next. And that's when it's good to set it aside if you have the luxury of time, because you notice when you open up the session the next day, you're in a completely different energy. Like suddenly you see the out, suddenly you see the exit, suddenly you know where this section should go next. So time is definitely, this is why I always ask for a lot of time, even though I'm not in a position often to ask for a certain amount of time, because the time is set already. Sometimes people do ask me, how much time do you want? And I always say, give me 2 weeks, even though I could probably do this by tomorrow. And it's not going to take me 2 weeks to create a 30-second piece of music or 60-second piece of music. But I want the ability to sketch a lot of different stuff. I want the ability to take 14 showers, where ideas come to me.
Yeah.
Apparently, ideas come to Pharrell Williams in the shower. I find it's the same for me. I don't know what it is about water, but yeah, you just want that time to be able to try different things, to see what works, what doesn't, and then feel confident that you've actually managed to walk around the labyrinth and see all the different possibilities. And so I do enjoy that time, but not too much time, because when you have more time than you need, then you get into paralysis, analysis, and all sorts of unhealthy overthinking and twiddling with the hi-hat when the chorus sucks, and that's not good.
No amount of fixing that hi-hat will improve the chorus.
No, and it feels like
terrible.
work, doesn't it? But it's not actually moving the needle forward, right? So I love tweaking the hi-hat, believe me. But that is almost like, you just got to laugh at it, because you know exactly what's going on when you're very early on in the track, when you don't have the hook yet, trying to spice up details.
Yeah,
I've heard a really, you're hiding. I've heard a really great quote, which I use a lot in my, like sometimes I do keynotes at these creative conferences about the, I guess, living in this triangle of art, commerce, and me. And I always like to bring up what Quincy Jones, this Quincy Jones analogy for making music? He said, first chalk, then watercolors, then oil. So he said, first you need to sketch with chalk the outline of the house. So in our case, this is like, okay, what are we building here? Let's say it's a 90-second song, and we know it needs a foyer or an intro. We don't want to introduce people to the main room too soon, so we got to walk through some kind of a, let's say, a room in between. So let's call that a verse. So we know that, so we can sketch that with chalk already. And in our case, it actually means like I actually draw MIDI rectangles, right, in Ableton before I even fill them in, just to see like what the structure of the house is going to be. So then we have the chorus, which is our main room that we want the guests to delight in. And then we're going to have to exit the room somehow in the backyard, in a serene way, in a relaxed way. So chalk, that's chalk, right? We know what the structure functionally should be. Then he said watercolors. Only when you know what the structure is should you start playing with watercolors. And watercolors are the emotions. So now that we have these rectangles drawn out of these sections, we can just put them on loop and start filling them in with maybe this chord progression, maybe that chord progression, right? And then oil is the little, the little one shots, the twiddling with the hi-hat, the reverses, the little magical moments that don't actually contribute to the hook, but just like they're like seasoning, right?
Right.
I found that incredibly helpful, man. Chalk, watercolors, oil. And anytime I'm screwing around with the hi-hat, I'm like, dude, you haven't even chalked the thing. You don't even know what you're drawing yet. And you're already like, putting up pictures on walls. Like, no, first build the house, right?
Yeah. You need the house before you hang those pictures.
That's right, man.
That's a good, I like that a lot. Very wise. Now you say you draw out the MIDI, so you do like kind of like map out the arrangement before you even get going? Like like you're going to have like maybe an 8-bar intro or...
It's more like basically the first thing I do because I'm always working to picture, or not always, but 90% of the time I have to import a movie file into Ableton. And then usually it's the movie file that will dictate for me the story, whether it's 30 seconds, 60 or 90, will dictate to me what needs to happen at each point in the film. So then I will actually either set markers and write myself notes, like make the intro from 0 to 6 seconds, drop the beat 6 to 12, go to second gear from 12 to 20, go into overdrive from 20 to 28, from 28 seconds to 30 seconds, calm down again, right? So sometimes I will do markers, and sometimes I will literally draw like MIDI, little MIDI clips without any information in them to see visually. Because the thing is, when you have the MIDI clip, it's almost like, what's the next step when you have an empty MIDI clip? To fill it with something. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? But you're not stuck in a wrong duration of a loop. You know exactly how long that MIDI clip should be because you know that section needs to last from here to here. So you can put it on loop and actually just start experimenting with the different things that you could fill that MIDI clip with. So, this is something that is so key in my field of work because, again, a songwriter can maybe take his time and, do a bunch of drugs or get high or I don't know, travel or trying to find inspiration for the album. I don't have that time. And so I had to get really good at the actual workflow. And all of the people in our business are the same way. Because we only have a day or two to come up with something great, we have to be organized as hell and we have to have like a system in place for coming up with the music. And it's quite fascinating, to be honest with you, how creative you can be when you have these systems in place, because a lot of people would say systems, like a process, man, that's like anti-creativity, but it's not true. There's this metaphor about a river. In order for the river currents to be strong, it needs to have two solid banks on either side. If you don't have those two banks on either side of the river, it becomes a pond. It stops moving. It just becomes still water. And I find that true in creativity is that the more you're able to put self-imposed limits on yourself, for me, it's time. It already comes from the client. But now that you have the time pressure, how the hell are you going to come up with something magical quickly? And there's no time to wonder. There's no time to search around for sample libraries. There's no time for any of that. You got to be organized and just hit the ground running when the project comes.
I think a lot of artists believe they have that. They have the time to go search for inspiration and do whatever they got to do to find it. And that's how you wind up not doing much. But it's interesting how you put it, because your line of work, doing music for commercials, for film, comes with built-in restraints. So you have to have this happen by now. This has to happen here. And I think those types of things are really, really helpful for artists too, to have those kind of just like boundaries, it's like almost like trying to play a sport without any rules. Like you'll never go anywhere with it. It'll just be craziness. But within those boundaries is where we can be creative. We can decide, come up with solutions. And I think that's really what creativity is problem solving. And if there are no problems, it's very hard to get to work.
I mean, our brain is not, I think, even built to live in a world without problems. I mean, nobody wants problems, but notice how we sort of get restless if you're on vacation too long. You start trying to figure out like what to sink your teeth into, because I think while we're alive and sort of functioning, we are looking for things to solve, whether it's a crossword puzzle or just trying to figure something out, so that you feel useful. So I think problems are good. In my line of work, there's a lot of problems. Like people get heart attacks in our business, literally. There are like people who, this has actually happened in Japan a few times now, but a couple of years ago, I believe, creative from advertising agency, and these guys work crazy hours. I mean, the pressure is so immense at advertising agencies for big brands that they're jumping out of windows, and so those problems are, I think, those are not good problems.
Right.
And there is a space in which your brain stops being effective when the problems just overcome you, But generally speaking, I think that we stay alive in some way. I don't mean physically, but mentally, by constantly challenging ourselves, and this is the problem that I found personally when trying to do self-initiated work, is that for whatever reason, I cannot commit myself to a deadline when I don't have an audience waiting for something. And so I find that this pressure of being a commissioned craftsperson, where somebody delivers the project, gives me a deadline, and there's a lot of pressure, that's what actually makes me operate with really high intensity, focus, and often effectiveness. Whereas, if I don't have that sort of outside pressure, then I found I'm really not very good, because I find it hard to limit myself to a deadline or to a theme or to some kind of limiting factors that will be able to help me channel the work. I've tried, but I've just consciously chosen to express my work and my creativity in this way. Not that all I do is commissioned work. I have like 1,000 sketches from the last decade. They've never seen the light of day, most of them. But that's okay with me, because my career is actually creating commissioned pieces. Maybe there will be a day when I choose to actually release something just for the sake of releasing it. I've done it before, but I feel quite good in being able to just come into the studio and create music and know that it will be seen and heard and getting paid for it. And I think, you could do a lot worse as a career. So
Oh no, I mean, that's excellent, and it's nice to know that it has a purpose too. Having something like you're doing it for a reason, not just because you think you should be doing something artistic. You're doing it because it's gonna go be put to use. It's gonna get used, and it's gonna help sell a product or create whatever it's gonna do. It's going to have a function, not just because it is like there is that other side of it when you actually do put something out and then it doesn't do anything. It just kind of goes on
Yeah.
SoundCloud or iTunes or whatever, and
Yeah,
that's,
yeah,
no one ever
yeah.
hears it.
I know that feeling also because I've put stuff out without putting any sort of push behind promotion because it's almost like deep down I knew that I'm not really willing to commit to a life where this is how I'm going to this is how I'm going to express myself musically. I'm willing to be an artist, to put music out there, to tour, to perform live. I've never really had that in me. Maybe when I was 8 years old, I would stand in front of a mirror with a tennis racket and like pretend I'm a rock star. But as I got older, I realized, I feel most comfortable at the intersection of art and commerce and not fully 100% in art and not fully 100% in commerce. I mean, I used to be a banker by day and a DJ by night. So that sort of contradiction, maybe it's because I'm a Gemini. I got two personalities, but I feel quite good when they're both present. And I start to get uncomfortable when I'm only drifting, only in the art world, or only drifting in the boardroom, talking about business and revenue. And so I kind of enjoy that feeling of bringing the two together. And a lot of musicians that I work with, that I commission for some of the projects that I have to oversee, they don't have that luxury. All they have is music. Like, they're very talented, and if they weren't doing music, they don't know what they would be doing. So that's also satisfying for me to be able to give them a chance to actually make some money doing what they do best at a time when, let's face it, people are getting their music for free. So, like, how long will people keep trying to squeeze pennies out of people? Like, it's over. I mean, it's like it's over basically, right? So I'm not saying that you can't make a living doing music. Of course you can, and you should, but we have to find alternate ways of making a living. Now, in my case, it happens to be that the path is very clear to where the money's going to come from, because it's brands who are spending all this money on creating all this sexy, edgy, beautiful content that is supposed to distract you, that is supposed to excite you, that is supposed to give you goosebumps. And as you know, music is probably doing most of the heavy lifting when it comes to generating those emotions. This is something I'm not sure that like a lot of brands still understand that. The great brands understand that. I know that for a fact because they're very conscious about their music making and very strategic about it. But there's still a lot of places in the world which surprise me, and a lot of brands that don't seem to get the fact that it's not the visual that makes people cry or laugh. I mean, how can you watch Star Wars on mute and feel any sort of anything? You can't. How can you even find out about anything unless somebody makes a sound, right? I'm getting philosophical now about sound, but when I speak about sound to people, I always say, you cannot find out anything about the person standing in front of you unless they open their mouth and they emit a sound. And then it travels into you. Literally, this sound emanating from another person goes inside of you. I mean, it's quite invasive. It goes inside of you. It rattles your insides And then your brain actually makes a story or creates meaning out of what that sound that the other person made is. And that's how we connect. That's how we get to know each other. It's quite incredible. Your eyes can only see the storefront, right? They can only see and assume things about other people. But we find out almost everything we need to know when somebody opens their mouth, right? So I find my work a lot is evangelizing. Like when I work, because my work actually involves different levels of working with music for brands. So on a very simple and obvious level, we have making music for commercials. But I've also done work directly with brands to work on their sound identity, for example. So a sound identity of the brand is just like their visual identity. They have certain colors. They have maybe a visual logo, like a Nike swoosh. And sometimes it's quite appropriate for a brand to think about, if you have a Nike swoosh, what would be the equivalent of that in sound? And maybe is it worthwhile to think about a sound signature? And of course, everybody's familiar with sound signatures or sound logos. There's some famous ones like Intel. Let's say the Apple startup sound when you first power your Apple product or MacBook, let's say.
Sure, the Nintendo Switch has their like it's the thing connecting.
Yes, yeah. Nintendo, PlayStation has one.
Yeah.
And so my work also involves working with brands directly to try to figure out what their sound is going to be. Do they need a sound logo, or maybe they don't need a sound logo, but they're going to get quite conscious about the way which kind of music they select, for example, or what kind of artists they collaborate with to give the brand over time a certain recognizable feeling. So actually the work, with brands, it's everything from commercials to sound identities. So creating sound identities and even creating sound-based experiences, which is also a very interesting thing because a lot of brands like Heineken, for example, that sponsor music festivals, they are now trying to be active contributors in a creative way to the festivals they sponsor and not just have a tent with some t-shirts and giveaways, because they know if they're really trying to achieve credibility, like street cred among music lovers at music festivals, a tent with giveaways is not enough. So they're actually trying to contribute some tangible experiences in time and space that people will stumble upon, and they will know that this was made possible by a certain brand. And I can talk about some of those things maybe later in the conversation.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and it's like the NBC chimes comes to mind, just these ideas of like this is our identity. Maybe we'll definitely get to that. I want to go back to you with the tennis racket, and because I think your story is cool too. You mentioned about being a banker and a DJ, and there's definitely a point I think many people get to where they have to sort of decide, in order for me to take this one thing any further, I'm going to have to take a leap of faith.
Yes.
Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what that was like for you.
Sure. So it started with a tennis racket and like the cheesiest music you can imagine. I remember I think it was the Final Countdown. Nice. Europe that I was rocking out to in front of the mirror.
Well, that has an emotional component to it,
yeah.
If I'm going to go run a marathon or something, I'm going to train to something like that.
It's quite epic, man. You can't blame the 80s for not being epic. There was a lot of really interesting stuff that happened in that decade, and musically, I think it was like the time when digital and analog started to get married, and some really interesting stuff started happening musically. I remember in like 88 or 89, Peter Gabriel's So album, like, and I was living in Eastern Europe. Don't forget, I was living in Eastern Europe back then, behind a like communist dictatorship. So we weren't even allowed to purchase music like this. You had to get like a bootleg cassette tape that your uncle brought over from somewhere.
Oh, wow.
I used to listen to like BBC radio tapes that were smuggled into Poland inside of quick hot chocolate boxes.
Really?
You know, it's
Wow.
yeah, man. And that's how, yeah, because you didn't have, like, everything was government owned and there was no such thing as a music store. And they didn't want you to listen to Western music because communism was supposed to be the answer, the answer to sort of like the way to be, the way to live. And so if you notice that people in the West are having fun and the music is better and everyone is just like happier, then you start wondering, hey, how come it's so like black and white and gray over here? And all we have is like government announcements all day on the radio instead of some cool music. So yeah.
I think there was somebody said if you want to end like the communism, or whether it was like just some like authoritative governments, we should just, rather than drop bombs on them, we should drop rock and roll blue jeans in Playboy magazine.
Yeah, man.
and that
Absolutely.
would change it. That must have made it a much. There's this kind of like allure, to anything like your parents say you can't look at, that's not for you, that's for kids. It must have been 10 times that, smuggling in like rock and roll inside the, cocoa.
Yeah,
mix.
man. Yeah. We had things like that. You had a lot of like, you would go to the market and you'd buy bootleg tapes basically out of the trunk of somebody's car. And I was a big heavy metal, like after my commercial stint with Gabriel and with Europe and all that stuff, that, kids love pop music, right? There's something about pop music that we just love. But then as I got into my teenage years, I started, loving stuff on the fringe, so speed metal, death metal, anything that was just weird and nasty and noisy. And so I remember buying like tapes of Anthrax, the music band, in a bootleg tapes out of a trunk and listening to it, and my family wondering what the hell am I listening to, right? But yeah, that was the beginning. It somehow stuck with me. It just shows you that we have something in us that just refuses to walk away from the music. And anybody who's involved in music in any way, shape, or form, even if you have a day job, but you just freaking can't walk away from the music. You have to have like a room where you have an MPC or you have Fruity Loops or whatever, and you just keep going back to generate sounds. It just shows you there's something invisible, maybe something in our soul that keeps following us and really pushing us toward creating sounds. So I think that was the case for me in high school. I started rapping, and I rapped for a while. Actually, it was a decade, I think, even after high school. Nice. But from rapping, I got into DJing because I was watching my DJ, and I was very fascinated with him and what he was doing. And then when I went to university, I really got into DJing, and I started playing at a local pub in university. And then I got really good at this thing. I mean, I loved the art of DJing because it allowed you in real time to move people, emotionally, and to surprise them. And I really got off on like building these kinds of sets where you would just drop something so random and unexpected that people would just lose their minds. And that was so damn satisfying to me. And that was university. And then I actually had a club promoter from like a big club club scene in Toronto, because I'm in Toronto now. I left Poland when I was 12. I went to Toronto. And Then when I was playing at these bars in university, I had like club promoters from the city come in and they heard me play and they said, "Hey, do you want to play, at a club in Toronto?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely, man." And so I started playing in clubs and started getting residencies in like major nightclubs in Toronto. And then when I finished university, I still wasn't ready to commit to music full time. And I had no idea what I'm going to do with myself. So like most people who get like a Bachelor of Arts degree, which I got,
Yeah.
political science, I ended up working at a bank, Bay Street, which is like Toronto's Wall Street, Toronto Dominion Bank. I'm sure you know it because they have branches, TD Waterhouse, or I think they're called in the US. So I was working there and I was DJing at night. So by day, I'm sitting in the bank, doing spreadsheets, joining conference calls, sitting in meeting rooms, like using words I can barely understand. And a part of it felt good because I was like 25 years old and I didn't have an idea about what success is or what I didn't discover my soul yet. So I was just sort of following the path that is basically laid out for you. Like you go to university, you get a diploma, you go to work for a good corporation, you get a nice business card. Everything feels right. Like you're on the subway in the morning, you have your cubicle, you have your pension plan, you have all that stuff. And so that pacified me for about 2 years before I started, before that invisible cloud that we spoke about started making me quite restless. And I was still very active in the music by night as a DJ. And so 3 years into my banking gig, I was starting to get sort of tired and restless. Tired because I was playing 4 nights a week at different residencies at Toronto clubs, having to come into office and actually be sharp, which is quite difficult when you get home at 4 a.m.
Yeah.
And so I started becoming less and less patient with even my day-to-day work. And like I would go into meeting rooms, on 4 hours of sleep, and I would be witness to this like corporate talk where it'd be like, well, we have to leverage all available synergies to maximize shareholder value. And like that, there's this sort of like rebellious artist in me that says, Bob, I have no clue what you mean when you put together these long sentences. Maybe you could just tell me like exactly what maximizing shareholder value means, because obviously we're here to maximize shareholder value. But what are you actually trying to say? What is the thing we're going to do, right?
Sounds great in a meeting, though.
Yeah, it sounds really good in a meeting. So I thought like I thought I was jeopardizing my job by doing that. But what ended up happening actually is that management started saying, hey, this guy's a born leader, So they like the shorter, the less patient I became, the less tolerant, the more they started promoting me. And so I faced like my first existential crisis, which was like, I really feel like this is not me. Like this, I'm not destined to spend the rest of my days in a cubicle. But at the same time, it's like the reality is just increasing that opportunity for me. I'm getting more money and bigger promotions and blah, 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 blah. So I knew that I had to go when, I was getting quite respectable money and I had a really good title. I mean, I had a long title. It was almost longer than my business card. And yet I felt restless and nervous about the fact that I'm spending most of my day sitting in a cubicle at a financial institution when I really want to create stuff. I want to make stuff that will actually impact people, that will move people. But I did not see a future in DJing because I saw famous DJs in Toronto who were stars, at their peak. And like 5 years later, they were delivering mail, like they were postmen, or they were working like some really crappy jobs when they started coming down from their, from their high of a DJ career. So I had no idea how actually I could make music my full-time income. And it just so happened that around the time when I was really, really desperate to leave the bank, a friend of mine who worked at an advertising agency asked me to DJ at an Xbox launch event, which I did. And then after that, he said, hey, you're also making music, aren't you? You're dabbling in music production. And at that time, I was starting to go beyond DJing and start trying to create music. And I said, yeah, I am. I'm making music now. And I was doing remixes and that kind of thing. And he said, I have a Pontiac Aztek commercial, which maybe you want to try to pitch your music there. And, Pontiac Aztek is like one of the ugliest cars in the world. I don't know if you remember this. It was a terrible looking car, but for me, I was very excited about this. I had no idea that, how to do it or how that stuff works. So I did a few tracks and they picked one and I made some revisions to it. And like maybe it was not even a week of work, maybe like 3 days. I had to do this evenings and weekends because I was still at the bank. And then, I'll never forget, like I got the paycheck for this thing and it was like, maybe, I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was like 3 months of salary at the bank for 3 days.
Wow.
Or at nights sitting in a studio. And I was like, holy shit, this is the path. Like, I can't imagine being a 50-year-old DJ, but I can see myself sitting in a studio crafting sound and then getting this kind of money. I can definitely see that. Because I also couldn't quite see the path of like surviving on remixes or surviving on we didn't really have streaming royalties back then, so that wasn't even an issue. But even today, streaming royalties, I mean, unless you're like, Ed Sheeran, let's face it, right? So to me, that was a clear path. Like, okay, brands pay big money. We make sound for brands. Great, that's what I'm going to do. So I ended up like quitting the bank, and I thought, this is what I'm going to do. And it felt great until like 6 months later, I couldn't get another project for the life of me. Like I was calling ad agencies thinking that as a guy who's a composer, I can just call ad agencies and get more work from them. And like 0 people were getting back to me. Nobody was getting back to me. And my friend ended up moving from the ad agency and he went to work for a TV station. So there was that. And so, I basically like ended up renting a really cool space with another guy. We built this studio and like we spent all this money to thinking that we're going to start making all this music for commercials. But I had so little clue about the business back then that I basically like wasted maybe it was a lot of money, man, because we were basically paying for studio space at quite a nice space, expensive rent, and I had 0 work coming in because no ad agencies would get back to me. And so finally a friend of mine who I actually worked at the bank with, she said to me, what are you doing, because you just left and like nobody knows what you're actually doing? And I said, I'm trying to make music for ads, but it's not going so well, so I might actually need my job back at the bank. And she said, well, I have a friend who actually works at a major advertising agency. Why don't you have a coffee with him? And so she introduced me to the guy, and we had a coffee, and he told me, he's like, dude, nobody's ever going to work with you. Like, you're wasting your time. And he explained to me the whole process. And basically I had no idea about the industry. So I was like naively knocking on doors, but they were the wrong doors because advertising agencies don't work with individual composers. They work with music production houses that specialize in making music for commercials. So my mistake is I was going to advertising agencies when I should have been going to music production houses. So basically he taught me like how the business works. I started going to music production houses and they listened to my music. They said, "Hey, this is quite good stuff, but beyond that, you're quite good with people. Like I think you're actually going to really connect with people at advertising agencies." So one studio in Toronto gave me a shot and basically they hired me on a really bad salary compared to my banking salary. But they said, "Hey, if you bring in more work, then you can take a cut of it and you can produce the work." And I'm like, "Produce the work? I don't even know. What do you mean produce? Like make the music?" I had no idea. Like, "Don't worry about it. We're going to explain everything to you." And so that's what happened. I got into the studio. I ended up connecting with advertising agencies. Now they would answer my phone call because I was actually calling from a music production house instead of being an individual composer. Right. And so I made a few connections, a few friends. Work started coming in slowly. I learned the ropes of what producing music for a commercial means, because it's not just making music, but actually being responsible for delivering the music. So you don't actually have to make it. You have to be basically responsible for creatively directing it. And from there on, like, I never looked back. I actually became part owner of this studio 2 years later, the studio in Toronto. Then I fell in love with a European girl, Polish girl, actually, and ended up leaving everything in Canada for her. This was like 4 years, I think, into my stint in Toronto, into the business. And at that point, like, I just looked at my priorities and I'm like, it's very important for me to have somebody by my side. Work is always gonna happen, but finding your soulmate, that's not exactly something that waits, right, or that will keep popping up. So I really made a decision to commit to this relationship and to try it out, and everything worked out really well. And I moved to Europe, ended up going to Amsterdam and working there for 6 years for one of the best music production houses in the world called Massive Music, where I was a creative director, and I got a chance to work on really high-profile campaigns with really big brands. And then 5 years after that, I got the itch, and I was restless again to be a chef in my own kitchen. And so I decided to leave and just continue doing what I do, but running my own kitchen instead of cooking for somebody else. I've been talking for it seems like 2 hours, man. I'm sorry.
No, it's good. It's a good story. It definitely involves a lot of, like we said before, the leap of faith, kind of jumping off the ledge and following what you really believe in. Because I'm sure you had people along the way. What are you, crazy? You can't quit this job. What are you, crazy? You can't leave this music production house.
It happened.
You can't do
my
it
mom,
for,
right? When I was leaving the bank, my mom's like, "What are you doing? You're going from this nicely dressed boy with a business card and a pension plan to what?" Because nobody can even explain what making music for nobody can explain what being a music producer in a world of music commercials and brands is. People are like, "Oh, so you make the music?" I'm like, "Well, not always." "So who makes the music?" "Well, I'm like composers or singers or songwriters." "So what do you do?" I'm like, "Well, I'm the guy who gets the project and I have to oversee that the right music is made for it." They're like, "But you don't actually make the music." I'm like, "No, sometimes I do, but a lot of times I don't." So my mom just couldn't wrap her head around what the hell does it mean, And the funny thing is, later on, I had moments of crisis in this industry where working with brands and working on commercials drove me so bananas that I had these like crisis points where I was like, you know what? I am not doing another goddamn commercial for Tide detergent or some billion-dollar brand that doesn't need me to make them another million. I want to do something valuable with my life. So I had these moments of crisis. And at those points, my mom would say, don't you leave this advertising thing. You're very good at this advertising music thing, So leap of faith that you're talking about, nobody can see what you can see. Nobody can sense what is stirring in your soul. They can't.
Yeah.
All they see is outward signs. And those outward signs, before you take the leap of faith, are normally not positive looking signs. A lot of times before you make that leap of faith, you're restless, nervous, tight, anxious, all of those things. You seem confused. You don't know what to do. That's how people around you see you. And so no wonder that the best thing they can offer you is like, stay put, don't jump, don't take this leap of faith. But they are not the ones who see what you see or feel what you feel. And the only person responsible for this book that you're writing called Life is you. And you gotta read this book at the end of your life and go like, did I author this thing well? Or did this chapter go on too long when I knew I should have started the next chapter? And those are tricky answers, and nobody can answer those things but you. And the best advice I can give people before they take a leap of faith is that they need two wings, not just faith, but also reason and faith. There's some people who are all about leaps of faith, and they're idealistic and they're very enthusiastic and God bless them, but there hasn't been enough reason or assessing reality in a very cold and honest, brutally honest way.
Right.
And so you cannot take a leap of faith with one wing. You're going to fly in circles. So reason is the part of the formula that basically assesses your chances realistically. And I remember when I was, about to leave the bank, I would write myself these like affirmations every morning and like just write in my journal every morning and go, dude, you have the ability to communicate with people. You have the ability to make connections, to build relationships. You're a good talker. Check. All you got to do is get enough people out to lunch with you or for a beer in the business. And your music is good enough. It may not be the best in the world, but it's definitely good enough to get attention right now. Like people are answering my calls when I was first getting into the business because what they heard was good enough to get their attention. So just keep writing these things in my journal saying, it would be hard for you to fail if you did indeed work hard at contacting as many people as you can, exposing your music out there, and just being yourself, but putting yourself in front of the kind of people who can give you opportunities. So when I wrote those things in my journal, it seemed that I wasn't lying to myself. Like I could read this and go, this is all true. This is all true. So therefore, I feel very good about my chances when I take this leap of faith. Two wings, man, reason and faith. If you only have reason, but you don't have faith, you're never going to move. That's the other part of that. It's like you will keep rationalizing and you will keep thinking about your chances, and you might even think you have a good chance. But that faith component, which is like trusting in the unknown, taking the leap, going forward into a dark alley without seeing a light necessarily at the end of the tunnel. Man, that's the tough part, but that's the necessary part. Like, if you only go by what you see in life, then all you're going to get is what you see, and none of us are ever delighted by the things that we already know. Like, we all like to be surprised, and so in order to be surprised and to be able to tell yourself at the end of your life, because by the way, I always think that way, like it may be a little depressing, but I always think about like getting run over by a streetcar, and I'm like, okay, so I'm under a streetcar, like what am I thinking? Like, and it's always the same stuff that I'm thinking, it's like, what's going to happen to my loved ones? And therefore, working backward from that, I spend as much time as I can with my family. Number two, did I make the most of my opportunities, of my unique DNA? As much as possible. Did I take the chances? Was I constructive and courageous instead of making excuses and rationalizing why I won't try something that may seem out of my range? And yeah, I always think backwards that way. And that allows me to have this sort of crazy, sometimes, I wouldn't call it crazy, but it's a bit crazy, There is a bit of craziness when you make a leap of faith, but it's controlled craziness. It's like, if, because you're using your reason and you're using your faith, I think it's balanced, and I think it may not always work out, even if you use reason, sure, but you won't be able to tell yourself, I did something stupid. No. You will try and you will fail. So what? You did the best decision, you thought about it, that you possibly could at the time. There's no guarantee that anything will ever work out.
Right.
But
well, it's even with the bank. I mean, that could collapse. That's not, as much as we see jobs like that as like these sure things, like nothing's a sure thing anymore.
I saw people getting let go at the bank. I've never seen these same people who are so composed in meetings, so articulate with their long syllable words, leveraging, synergizing. They were shaking and crying when some of them were let go. It was unbelievable to watch. Like, there is no such thing as certainty in life, right? It doesn't matter where you go. So the best thing you could do is bet on your unique strengths. No matter what you're doing, bet on your unique strengths. See, music, although I know how to come up with interesting sounds that might give people goosebumps, I hope, I still to this day feel weird about calling myself a musician. And it still feels like this is just like I'm pretending almost. Like, it's like I almost like I want to give a caveat to the people that sometimes hand me money personally to compose something. Not as a music producer, when I will have a roster of songwriters or sound designers creating something for a really high profile campaign. But when I have cases when people want me personally to compose something, I'm still like, are you sure? Because, I feel like my range is so limited. Like, I can't play any instruments. Mm-hmm. I can only basically assemble a bunch of sounds and tweak them in a way where they will be interesting and they will have a certain climax and a certain resolution. But to this day, I still feel like, it feels weird to call myself a musician. And I always want to give these caveats like, I don't know what's going to happen with this. You want me to do this? Okay, I'll do it. But it's somehow, it works out. But what I wanted to say with that, because I kind of got off on a tangent, is that what I feel most confident in and what I bet money on is my ability to connect with people, to have conversations like this, to inspire other people, to have other people say, I want to be around this guy. And that's how I get my musical opportunities. I talk my way into them. It's not empty talk, I try to be a person of substance. I try to read a lot. I try to consume the kind of things that will make me an interesting conversation partner. And that's very important. And that's the strength that I bet on, my ability to get the projects. So when I get these projects and, I want to have a world-class violin solo, I'm not going to be the guy doing the violin solo, because that's not my superpower. That's not my strength. So you bet your ass I'm going to find the best violin player that I can find and commission them to lay down a solo for me on a composition that we're working on. So if you're not lying to yourself about your strengths, I think you will succeed more often than not. The danger is delusion. And when your imagination is more active than reality, like when you've so convinced yourself about a certain skill that you have, that you're great at, when reality is not, you're not great at that skill. And that might be brutal to hear, but I think like most professional musicians know what their strengths are, and they don't pretend that they are good at something they are not, because it's a cruel world, man. If like being a professional musician, there's no faking. Like if you're not creating magic, you're not going to convince anybody with words that this is your strength. You're going to present your piece of music and people are going to be like, weak. This is nothing. We don't have anything. And I've had this happen. I've had like musicians protest. They're like, well, did you see what I did there? I went from this chord to that chord. And I'm like, my work is not explaining to the client the brilliance of your chord progression. My work is to get goosebumps and then stand behind this work to the client. Even if they don't get goosebumps, I'm going to say, this is something that's going to move your audience. So, so anyway, yeah, that's assessing your strengths honestly is key.
Those are two different things, really. Being, say, a very proficient musician and moving an audience emotionally. You
True.
can, play your guitar 100 miles an hour and, cool, you move your fingers real fast. But at the same time, like, there could be another person that has nowhere near the skill but is able to evoke those emotions. And that's a much different type of thing and a much different goal.
You're very right about that. And I think a lot of musicians might be angry with me that maybe, I call myself a musician when my knowledge, theoretical knowledge of music, even after all these years, man, like after having made so many compositions, I still have no idea what key I'm in half the time. Like, I don't know. I just don't know, It's really weird. They might be upset with me, and but this is just as you said. It's not about your knowledge. It's not about theory. It's all about the effect, because it's not even what you do. It's about the effect that it has on the person that is listening to it. There's an incredible guy who's no longer alive. Trying to remember his name. He wrote Tony Schwartz. Are you familiar with him?
No, I don't think
Tony Schwartz was a very interesting character. He's no longer with us. His son is actually still alive and trying to carry his father's legacy. But Tony Schwartz was a sound-obsessed guy who basically worked on commercials. He was a consultant in the communications area. He even advised like presidents, politicians. He created these like game-changing commercials, and he was just obsessed with sound. He would record everything around him, and he had this phobia, I believe, called agoraphobia, where you're afraid to leave your house or your
it's like a
surroundings.
social phobia.
Yeah. So he was quite like that, very peculiar guy, but a brilliant guy. And he has a book called The Resonant Chord, which I don't think is in print anymore. Maybe it is. You can certainly Google PDF file. You'll probably find something. And I would advise anybody who wants to work with sound in a sphere of communications or influence. There's so much gems in that book. One of the things he says is our work is not to communicate something to somebody. Our work is to unlock the things that are already inside of the other person. You see? This is like a total mind shift, man, because it's like whenever you're making music, it's quite a selfish thing because you're thinking subjectively, oh, what resonates with me. But if I'm creating something that has to move an audience, my criteria is completely different. It doesn't matter what moves me in a certain way. I have to make sure that the audience that I'm creating sound for already has a reference point for what I'm doing. And then I can add a layer on top of that that maybe will surprise them. I call this a sandwich, like in between two pieces of bread that they're familiar with, that they will eat and digest without resistance. You can always slide something in that's maybe a little novel or surprising. That very thing will give them goosebumps. If you only keep people feeding them with the familiar things, then there's not going to be much delight or surprise. So this is another aspect of my work. It's like trying to really dig into, who is going to be listening to this thing. And it's almost like being a DJ because you're trying to foresee the reaction they will have when you press this pad and this sound triggers, What will happen then? Like, will they associate it with Jaws? Will they associate it with E.T.? What's going to happen? And it's kind of the thing, the exercise that we have to do. And a lot of the artists or songwriters or composers that I work with, they don't think this way. They just create music. They're very good at that. So my job is actually to mediate or to direct that process in a way where I'm going to get the best out of them. And the benefit they get from me is they have someone to guide them to say, okay, like, where should I go with the next chord? Or what should I do at the 28th second there? And usually I have some kind of an idea, even if it ends up being wrong. At least I can help them to steer their composition a certain way. I have to simultaneously think about not just the audience, but the client also. Because believe me, it's not always that the audience gets the best kind of music that I think they should get. Well, the client decides that. And a lot of times I cannot persuade the client. But it is my job to kind of be the person who sees the whole battlefield and says, okay, on one hand, we got to appeal to the audience. On the other hand, I got to appeal to the client whose daughter hates violin. And he's definitely going to be averse to violin because he's always showing his family members the spot. This happens all the time. Like a brand person will go home and go, hey, Jody, his 16-year-old daughter, what do you think? We're making a commercial and it's got to appeal to you kids. What do you think? And she might have subjective taste and she'll say, I hate it. And then he comes back and he's like, I hate it. And then, it's like you have all these people whose job it is to be experts in what we do, but we're overridden by
that day.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
But essentially I get to see the whole playing field. So it's like I see the client, I see his daughter, I see the audience, and the film itself, the commercial has its own needs and its own criteria and its own it will also dictate a lot what the music has to do. So the musician, when I work with them, they often don't have to worry about any of those things because I'm the person, the contact to the outside world. So So they just trust me to sort of guide the process, and I'm not always right, you know. Sometimes I recommend things that don't work out, and there's frustration because we have to revise now, but this happens all the time, and like most musicians that I work with are professionals, and you know, attitude is so big in our business. Like I can't stress it enough. It's like you can have all the skills of a remarkable musician, but if you have the wrong attitude, it sabotages everything because it drains your energy because you negatively approach having to reopen the session for the 17th time to make a tweak. And I kid you not, there are instances where I've made like 52 revisions or I've made like 8 tracks in a space of 1 week, and none of them are being accepted by the client. And the musicians I'm working with are burning out. They're basically going, well, I have no freaking clue where to go next. And I don't either. And the client's not giving us any good feedback that could tell us where we could potentially go next. So those things happen. And you know, if I had any advice, like for somebody who wants to make a life as a craftsperson, because this is different from being an artist. A craftsperson is somebody who gets paid to create something for other people. Develop a really unshakable attitude of positivity and enthusiasm about the fact that you're getting paid to be in the studio. And don't look at it as 47th revision. Look at it as I'm opening my Ableton session to create some sounds or to tweak some sounds. Like I was going to do that anyway. Yeah, sure, it would be nice to click new session and work on something new, but let's put things in perspective. Like I'm not asking somebody to dig a hole and then kill somebody and to throw them in there and hope nobody ever finds out. I'm just asking you to open your Ableton session and make a tweak. So attitude is so key because honestly, you could age very quickly if you have the wrong attitude, and you will also lose business. In this business, you will lose business with the wrong attitude. Because there's so much stress on the job that if I, for example, work with somebody new and they start sighing and swearing and just complaining a lot when we have to get the 47th revision done, there's a good chance, like, unless this person's a complete genius where I can't get what I need out of some, like, only they can provide me with this very special thing, I'm probably going to go to somebody else because of their attitude. Because when I call them and say, dude, you're not going to believe it, man, they want another change. What I hear from my most favorite people on my roster is, oh, really? Hilarious. All right, what do we need to do? You see what I mean? Fundamental change.
Yeah.
It may seem like I'm not dropping any value bombs here or like, but this is foundational stuff, man. Foundational
stuff. In every
stuff.
field.
You're gonna save yourself gray hair, and you're gonna, believe me, you're gonna attract more opportunities in your life when people feel that when you're confronted with a challenge, you're like, man, it ain't nothing, you know? I work with one guy in Toronto, Jim Guthrie. Lovely song.
I think I know him.
Yeah, he's making music for video games now.
Sword and Sorcerer soundtrack, maybe?
That's correct.
That's correct. That soundtrack. It's his fault that I bought a Casio SK1 or SK
there you go.
something.
So
funny.
when I was in Toronto, Jim and I used to do a lot of work. I even commissioned him like a couple of years ago for a campaign for Japan, where he wrote some stuff, but it didn't end up making the cut. But with Jim, we've always, and with a lot of guys that I work with, we end up talking about work for 10 minutes and like 90 minutes about everything else. Philosophy, this thing called life, and, you know, how do we navigate it? So I used to have a lot of these conversations with Jim. And Jim was quite unshakable that way. Like, he said, dude, I never run out of music. So it's for him, it was weird to have this mindset of like fear and mild aggression when you ask somebody to develop something new when they've already tried 7 things. He's like, well, it's not as if I have a finite amount of music inside of me.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Right? So I thought that was a lovely quote, man. And I always use that. Like, there's no just open the session and do it again, man. It's like, there's attitude, man. The way you see things, it's so big. It's so big.
Yeah. Oh, that's a cool connection.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like his work a lot.
I don't think he does a lot of commercials anymore.
Yeah, I knew him from the game. I've read a spot, I think, on Create Digital Music about his work on, I think it's called like The Sword and the Sorcery or something.
Yeah.
I have the soundtrack. I bought the soundtrack from him off like Bandcamp or something. And I got intrigued by the sounds, which I learned was like the Casio SK1 or 10 or something along those lines. And I bought one on eBay after that.
Did you make any sound packs with that?
I did. I made I did a collaboration with a guy named Isaac Kotek, who recorded field recordings of like ice caves up in Washington, I believe.
Oh wow, okay.
And I took my sounds of that synth and layered them in with the ice cave samples.
Okay.
I'll
going to
put
check
a link
that out.
to that.
What intrigued you about the sound? Was it that you heard this sound, you knew it was an SK1 and that you want that, or like what enticed you to buy that piece of gear?
I liked the sound of his music. So I
Okay.
heard his music through this Create Digital Music article about that game. I might have downloaded the game just to play it, but I was really just digging the sounds.
Right, okay.
So I just wanted that, really. And I did make a pack. There was only a few presets on there, I think, on the whole keyboard, but they're just like those nostalgic childhood sounds, like kind of a cheap keyboard synthesizer.
I think I even had one. I don't know if I had that when I was a kid, but it's crazy when you pick up a piece of gear that actually you experienced as a kid and how much it brings back to you. Like suddenly I can smell things. I can almost put myself back into that moment when I was a child, It's quite powerful. It's quite powerful, and it's beautiful. Memory, the whole topic of memory and music and sound, we could go on for like hours about it, but it certainly, music and sound is a key, more effective than any other key at unlocking. Maybe that's not fair to say that it's more effective than any other, because some people might be more like scent focused. Maybe they're more visual. Maybe they're more tactile. But I would say that it's a reasonable statement that sound is very effective at unlocking things that you have long forgotten.
Yeah.
And suddenly they just spring back into your consciousness and they open up other doors. It's pretty fascinating.
I think it's a big part of what I like to do with my own sound creation is that it does take me back, like it gives me that feeling. Well, that's why I like to record sounds, say to like the VCR tapes, and then just play them back, and they have that strange quality that's kind of hard to put your finger on, but it just reminds you of those old days. And I wonder often, like if newer or younger people that haven't had those experiences directly still get the same kind of like charge that I get, or if it's but because I guess on a level, like I get those feelings off of listening to, say, like a Beatles record or some old recordings, some old rock and roll. Like it's got this like nostalgic feeling that I wasn't around for.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
I wonder. That's a good question. It's really hard to figure out what exactly people feel,
Yeah.
when they experience something for the first time. But this is probably, we talked about the fact that our job is in a way to unlock the things already stored in our audience for maximum impact. Because then it's like they are doing the heavy lifting. All you got to do is like take the safety off the grenade, but it actually has to explode inside of them. Like, you know what I mean? You can't, the explosion can't happen outside of somebody, right? So you can see why music is cyclical, like why old things keep coming back. Because I think it's almost like when we get older, we want to like desperately bring back into focus certain sounds from our youth or from our childhood. And so that's why this keeps happening. Like, young people who've never experienced it get to experience the VHS sound, and to them that becomes the new. But for us, it's like we're the grandparents telling our kids, "Oh, kid, this is nothing new. Are you kidding me? Like, this is what I grew up to." And they so, but it's beautiful, regardless of how it happens or if you think it's new or old. The point is it's interesting to think about music if you're a craftsperson in that way. First of all, subjectively, that VHS tape sound brings you back to your childhood, but also think wider. Like, remember that when you trigger that sound, when somebody plays that sound, it will also transport them into childhood. And that to me is the very rewarding thing of like developing a relationship or communion with your listeners. In a way, you're experiencing the same thing when you press play. Maybe not the same thing, but you know what I mean. You basically are experiencing the same frequency and likely the same recollections and likely the same associations. So that is the fascinating thing about sound. It's a beautiful thing. It's really, I think we could talk about this for ages because, this is what drives you, your exploration, your work, your curiosity, why you want to be around your gear and anything that makes a sound, right?
Well, I think your work really does speak to that. I'm kind of thinking back to, I was watching some of the stuff on your page, which is TommyZee.co, by the way. Tommy, TommyZee.co. We'll put that in the show notes, along with a few other things too. But there's one video in particular, I think it's a Honda commercial, where they're riding around in the car, the girl's growing up in the back seat, basically. All these memories, all the photographs of the car. And then they get the new car delivered, and the girl's like chasing after the old car as it drives away. And it just came back to me when you're talking about unlocking these things, and it's this like letting go of your childhood and watching like this symbolic item of your life, this car in this case, go away, and you're moving on, and it's a new beginning, and it's the end of, it's, and I think you wrote in there, it's, I'll find it, but it says something like, it's more about the people than the products, the brands. It's more about the brand, the people than the brand. And I think the way you guys did that particular commercial is really nice, and just pulling that out of me personally, just those feelings of.
I had the same feeling working on that commercial, and I was very grateful that I had the opportunity to work on something like this, because I work on a lot of car commercials which I don't show on my reel. And in some cases, I feel weird because I've had the same stuff on my reel for some time now, but none of it feels old to me. And the wonderful thing about that kind of work is it is timeless work, because it doesn't rely on a trend or some kind of a tactic that's popular in 2019. It is just a timeless truth. And it's testament to the fact that you can create commercials that are beautiful, that are true. Because this commercial is true. Like, this is why I got the feels when watching it. You're damn right that a car from your childhood is a powerful part of your life. I mean, it's just the truth, man. And so brands that are able to tap into that kind of truth with these stories, they're gonna win. I mean, there's not gonna be a human being that goes, "Oh, I feel cheated by this commercial." No, man, it's a wonderfully spent 2 minutes, and we wrote a song specifically for that film, and the director, his name is Hisashi Eto. He's a Japanese director who actually studied film in New York and then went back to Japan. And he's a busy guy. I mean, he's doing a lot of commercials, and I've had the pleasure of doing a lot of campaigns, Japanese campaigns with him. And he's that kind of guy. He's all about authentic, beautifully shot moments, human, not artificial, not fast cuts, not some kind of inorganic sound effects or visual effects, just as real as possible. And when I play this spot to people, like, they're always like, "Oh man, this is so beautiful." And I'm very thankful to have had the opportunity to work on something like this. And the songwriter who actually wrote a song for this, his name is Sean Christopher. You can check him out. He's got some wonderful music out. He's an artist. I mean, he sometimes does commercials on the side. And he's a good friend of mine. And just like I've had like a lengthy conversation with you, it's the same with him. Every time we chat, we talk about everything, life, mystery of our existence, everything, And this is just my way. I'm not the most efficient guy in the world. But this is the way I want to do business. This is the way I want to connect with the people that I work with. I want to get along with them because I feel that music and the making of good music, there is no blueprint for it. And the best way that I know how is to create the right circumstances for magic to happen. And what that means is that I have a tea with the artist if he likes tea. We talk, we ease into it, we inspire each other, we get into that frequency even in our conversation where he feels inspired to create something great for somebody like me. As opposed to just some guy who's sending him a paycheck so he'll bang something off whenever he gets a chance.
Yeah.
No, I want him to feel committed to creating something that's going to make me say, "Wow, this is so beautiful. I'm so thankful that we're working together," and all that good stuff, When I heard the track, like, I don't think we had a lot of revisions on the track. I think we actually, the film director asked me to try different vocals at first. We tried a female vocal. We tried a bunch of different female vocals because he thought that maybe the female vocal will sort of personify the fact that the girl is a hero in this commercial. But we ended up sticking with Sean's vocal, and I think it fit best from the beginning because he is basically the author of the track. And I feel like every other vocal that we laid down on top didn't feel like it was the vocal,
Right.
And so when I heard the track for the first time, I was just like, man, this, like, it's just like, it's like Bob Marley said, man, when it hits you, man, you feel no pain, right? Like, it's, is that what he said? I hope I'm not getting Bob Marley wrong.
I know what you're saying. Yeah, that's something about music. It's the one thing that hits you that you don't feel pain. Something along those lines.
Something along those lines.
It's a good one.
But when it was like I knew it was gonna hit people in the feels, you know,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's one of those rare cases. You don't get to work on a lot of things like that, and that's why that thing is gonna stay on my portfolio for a long time, even though I think that is like a year, 2 years old, 2 years old now. But that's the beautiful thing about working on timeless stuff instead of focusing on trends and trying to chase trends. Because if you do that, then you can only keep your pieces relevant for the season.
Yeah.
But if you create a beautiful, timeless, elegant piece of music, that'll live forever. And personally, I bet on timeless over trendy any day.
Yeah, I agree, and it does. It works well, and it's you don't have to be a little girl that owned a Honda or whose parents owned a Honda to, connect with that, to have those feelings unlocked with you.
Exactly.
It's really nice work, and it's very nice talking to you too, and just getting a lot of that background. I now that you mention it, I think a lot of like the best music making experiences I have usually start with some kind of hang, some conversations, some talking, going out, whatever it is, and just kind of coming together on the same frequency. We had in high school when we had a band, we were trying to get a new bass player, and the bass player, after we let him in the band, he would joke around. He's like, we went down, we played music for like 10 minutes, and then we played video games for the next 2 hours. And then they're like, you want to be in the band? And we knew right away he was a good enough musician. But what we were, kind of looking back, we were trying to figure out if we could hang with him, if it was a good fit, if there's good chemistry. And it's I think music making, especially together as a band and stuff, is really about the personal connections more than anything. I think I've played with people that I've had great connections with, and even if the music isn't as good, there's still something really special. But when there's no personal connection, and even if the music is great, it's like, it's missing that part that's so important that I think makes it stick and last.
Yeah, I mean, your best moments in life will always be moments between people that you share a connection with. And so it's easy to forget about that but when everything is said and done, it's gonna be that you remember. And those relationships are priceless, and I don't know that you can probably make good music and not get along with the people that you make music with. God knows there's like plenty of famous bands where they hate each other, but they just keep touring and they put on great shows even though they don't like each other. But like, who wants to live that way? Maybe some people do. I don't. I mean, I wouldn't want to be around people that I don't feel comfortable around anymore. So that's just the kind of guy I am, and I guess I'm very sensitive, and I like to have people around me who I can be sensitive with. And I found actually that it's like what I compare the creative process to is getting in a dark room, naked with people, and trying to find a door handle, like your way out, So it's like, who would you rather be there with, strangers that you have no idea who they are, or people who you feel comfortable around and get into an uncomfortable situation with? Because making music is being vulnerable. There's no way to create something that's going to emotionally influence somebody else without you being emotionally influenced first. It's like you can't bypass that part. It first has to move you before it moves others. But what happens when you are moved and then the other person goes, oh, that's completely flat and terrible.
Yeah.
Then there's a bit of like friction, because then it's kind of hard not to get hurt by that, But I found that actually when I work with people who I'm comfortable with, none of those things become a factor. So you could work really fast and effective. And what I mean by that is like somebody will play something and I can literally say, no, that's shit, without intending to insult the person, but because we are so comfortable together and we are in the heat of this moment of creating something and we're onto something, but we're trying to find this hook, this melody line, and he plays something. I'm like, that's shit. Because we're comfortable, he knows I don't mean to disrespect him.
You're
it's
not
just that
saying your shit.
I'm speaking completely in a trance. I am completely in a trance. I am not even conscious of what I'm saying. I am shortcutting even my verbal communication. But you can only understand that when you've been in the studio with people and you know these people and you feel comfortable with them, to know that what those words, the context of those words. Otherwise, if I was to say to somebody who just laid down a line, no, that's shit, try something else, they would be like, are you kidding me? Like, how dare you, right? I would react the same way. So I would be like, wow, okay, tell me how you really feel. But with people you feel comfortable with, that doesn't matter. Like if if you've gotten used to working that way and you realize that things that fly out of your mouth are just instinctual, it's like it's got nothing to do with us and everything to do with the music. And trying to get to the moment where you look at each other and you're both like, right? Those moments are usually when you stand up. I don't know if you have those moments, but for me, it's like when I know that I'm onto something, I stand up. I don't know how many people that are listening to this or watching this are going to identify with it, but that's when I know we've unlocked the doorway to something potentially great. When I'm standing, I cannot sit.
I'm usually laughing. That's how it comes out of me.
Laughing is good too, right?
I laugh, yeah. Like when the music is working and we're vibing, it's just like, I don't know if it's funny really, but it's just like, wow, look, what's happening? This is great. It's like, it just feels like magic, and it's like, I just laugh. I just can't hold it back.
I know exactly what you mean, because it's like reality surprising you, and it's like the same laughter I think that I had when I was overwhelmed by the Baltic Sea waves one time. And like the wave was just doing whatever the hell it wanted with me. I wasn't in danger because I was close to shore, but I had to laugh about how powerless I was to control my body in the face of nature. And even though it's not the same thing, it's kind of the same thing, because it's like suddenly you're overwhelmed by music and sounds aligning in a certain way, which you could not ever foresee coming. And so your brain is just like, all it can do is laugh, because it could never point that way ahead of time.
Very true.
All it can do is laugh, right?
Gets you to your feet.
Yeah.
Nice, man. This has been a great conversation. I really enjoy your perspective, and I think it really makes it clear why you're having success at what you're doing. Just this love for what you do, and this idea of tapping into the emotions and connecting with people. Really, that's really what we're doing. We're just using sound to connect with people. That's and right. You put it very nicely. I really thank you for taking the time to talk about it.
Thank you for having me, man. I reached out to you because I wanted to be a part of your world in some way, shape, or form. And after having listened to some of your episodes, I knew that you're a thoughtful man, and that we would probably have a great conversation. I enjoyed it. I hope, because we've been talking for a while, I hope that it resonates with other folks. That's all I can hope for, that somebody out there listening gets something out of this that maybe changes their perspective or inspires them in some way. All we can do is just have these conversations like we just did, put them out there, and see what kind of domino effect it's going to bring.
Well, I can tell you there's at least one guy out there that it's had an effect on. And that's me.
Same here, man. So
Cool.
that's two.
That's two. Double what I thought.
That's two.
Nice.
There you go. It's exponential.
Well, let's see. You mentioned you did a course. Just as we wrap up, I want to give people some ways to find your stuff, and we mentioned your site,
Sure.
TommyZee.co. That's CO. But you also mentioned you did something with Graham Cochran on the Recording Revolution, who also does awesome
Yeah, so
work.
I've actually created like a mini course for his VIP section, and we're going to be doing an interview also on Recording Revolution sometime in the near future. We just have to find a date that works for us.
Nice.
And this is all because basically trying to see if there is a demand out there in the world of musicians who are listening to this for a online teaching or a master class that would teach what it is that I do and help musicians to break into the business. So as I have these conversations with you and with Graham, I basically just want to see, just by the response that we get, if people are interested in what it is that I do, and if they would be interested in actually participating in a masterclass like this. So I'm gauging interest right now. And I do have a website, Making Music for Brands, which is the website for this masterclass. I'm working on this masterclass right now as we speak. You can go to that website and download a PDF that will show you the 7 ways that musicians can make money with music in the world of music and brands. And then you'll be on my mailing list, and then basically you'll be kept up to speed about when the course is launching and all of that. Or you can actually join a pre-sale and buy the course right now at makingmusicforbrands.com. There's going to be a little link there called pre-sale. And you'd want to do that if you are indeed like really interested in this thing, because if I go ahead and I see that the demand is big enough and I do make this course, then it will be probably the lowest price that it will ever be at this pre-sale. Once I go forward and we develop this course, I'm going to keep adding content to it. And I'm probably going to raise the price of this. But like I said, right now, I'm just very organically and naturally connecting with folks out there, and just want to see if there is interest in this thing. Are people interested in the topic of making music for brands? If they want to know how the business works, how I got in, what technical skills you need to actually do what it is that I do, then, because like all of this comes from the fact that I once upon a time wanted to have a career in music, but I didn't see all the avenues. I thought either I have to sell singles for pennies, or I have to keep making $1,000 or $2,000 for a remix that I make. And it wasn't until I did this Pontiac Aztek commercial that I realized you could actually spend all your days in the studio making music, getting paid for it. And so I wonder, like, do musicians know about this? Are they aware of it? And if they are not, maybe someone should tell them, right? And so I figured, since I enjoy these conversations and I enjoy mentoring people, and I enjoy actually discovering new talent and channeling their talent into very practical use, I want to see how far I can take this. So yeah, check my workout, TommyZ.co or makingmusicforbrands.co. Don't be afraid to contact me, and I'll make time for anybody with goodwill.
I have to imagine that there's probably a lot of people that are interested in that. And, as you've said, like, I think in this day and age, there are a lot of creative ways to do music and actually live off of it. But they're not necessarily the old ways. And what I think you're doing is really cool. And yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of people that are interested in that. I think it's interesting.
The basic premise is like very simple.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the day, composers did not have day jobs. Music was their day job. So guys like Bach, when they needed money, they basically wrote pieces for people who paid them. Well, today it's not the church, it's not the kings who are patrons of art. It's actually brands. Very simple premise, but I believe this is the future. Brands are today's patrons of art. They rely on art to move human beings, because otherwise Red Bull is just sugar water or caffeinated sugar water, right?
Right.
Without the story, without the sound, without the experience, they're just like, they're in the business of actually creating stories, and music is a big part of it. So my very simple premise is to just open a horizon and perspectives to musicians to say, what if you could make music your day job, like, composers back in the day? But it is a very different mindset. It is a craftsperson mindset. You could still be an artist. Like, I work with artists who do this on the side just to make money because they cannot rely on their art to supply them with the kind of money they need to survive. On top of that, if you force your art to make money, you're talking about an entirely different set of rules now for your art, which may not be fair to your art. Whereas you should never feel bad about taking money from businesses or people with commercial interests who want your talent to give them a certain kind of magic, and then everybody benefits. So that's another mind shift that you could have your art be completely free of any need to make money. It can move people, it can influence millions, but you still got to survive. So the question is, how will you do it? Will you take a day job you don't like? Or might some percentage of musicians listening out there not even realize that they are a great fit to be this kind of craftsperson and exchange their time in the studio and the talent for a certain payment? So I'm really curious to see, how many people resonate with this idea. And, I'll definitely let you know. And I hope this is not the last time we chat, because I really had a great time. We were supposed to talk for an hour and we did twice that. And, I thought that this might happen, and it's fine because, hey, these conversations, man, how do you put a price tag on that? You don't, right?
Yeah. No, it's excellent. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. And when they go well, the time flies,
Yeah, man. Yeah, man. What time is it over there? You're in San Francisco, right?
No, New York, 4 o'clock. 4
Oh,
p.m.
you're in New York. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're Eastern. Yeah.
Well, cool.
It's 10
So we'll
p.m.
send
here.
people to TommyZ.co and makingmusicforbrands.co. And then, check out, sign up to get to know more about the course, the masterclass. If you're interested, I think I'm going to, so that sounds really cool. And anything else? Anywhere else you like to send people, or are we good here?
No, I think we're good. And this was fun.
Cool. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for listening. Thank you, Tommy, for taking your time and being so generous with your knowledge and your stories and your philosophies and all that good stuff.
I should thank you, man. You're the generous guy.
Oh, my
Putting
pleasure.
out packs and constantly putting stuff out there for people. It's really it's funny, right? Like, but I'm inspired by that because it's not at all part of what I do. I can't imagine doing that, you know, just because like I'm in a different world.
Yeah.
So when I see you doing it, I'm like, wow, how could anyone just keep putting stuff out there like this? You know, for other people to enjoy and be inspired by. So this is just the way the universe works. And, you know, we need all the pieces of the puzzle.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. And
yeah, man.
Thank you to everyone listening. We appreciate your time. And
thank you, guys.
Yeah, have a great day, everyone.